This is a GK Media podcast. David Tyler, Montreal, Canada. Thank you so much for joining me today on Garry Talks.
Hey, thank you for the invitation, Garry. I appreciate it.
Listeners, you're in for a treat because David has the most amazing voice. You've worked for over 35 years in television and radio, and you have a new podcast which started a few weeks ago called The Master Communicator with David Tyler, which is available across all mainstream podcast platforms. And it's like a masterclass for business leaders in terms of communication skills. Why is communication so important?
I don't know why communication is so important. I think that, I really believe that if we could all become better communicators, we're never going to be perfect communicators. If we could all be better communicators, we could create a better world. Learn how to listen, I think, is probably the biggest thing right now. If you've been on social media lately.
Yeah, definitely. I am often amused watching people having conversations where the person who is, in inverted commas, listening is clearly just waiting for that opportunity to just jump in with their opinion. And
that's right.
They're not listening back then. They're just waiting for the next.
Exactly. They're a lot of the times, people will listen to respond. I think the hardest thing for people to do is, in a one-on-one kind of situation, is to listen to someone speaking and in a non-judgmental way. Listening to listen, to understand, to empathize. It's one of the things that I teach in some of my courses.
Brilliant. Before we dive into the work you're doing at the moment in communication skills, talk to me about working in radio and television. So I myself worked in radio for 13 years.
Right.
And I've seen a lot of changes in that time. And I think radio is going through a massive change at the moment as well. I think certainly, it might sound a bit biased, but I do think podcasting is beginning to rise. And I think people choosing what they want to listen to as opposed to listening to what is being pushed out is changing the landscape as well for radio. But what sort of changes have you seen over the years?
I've seen a lot of changes. I got into radio in the late 1980s here in Montreal. I've done all my entire radio careers here in Montreal, except for the radio imaging that I do. That's all over the place. But having
and just explain to people what radio imaging is.
The voice that pops in between the songs or the commercials that says you're listening to whatever the station happens to. That's a very simple explanation.
Yeah. And you did. Sorry to interrupt again, David. The worst interviewer ever. But for our Irish listeners, David was the voice on Beat 102, 103
for a little while. Yes. Yeah. But I got into radio here in Montreal, North America, in the late 1980s, and radio at that time was very different. Let me just give you an example. That we weren't allowed to play two female singers back to back, because now this is not me. This was the grander thinking in the 1980s. Nobody wants to listen to a female singer, right? And tell that to Celine Dion now. But that's a different story. But radio has evolved. Radio has changed as well. And we as radio broadcasters have, I think, a responsibility. And I'm not just talking about public broadcasters. Here in Canada, we have the CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. I'm not talking about that kind of responsibility. It's our job to tell our audience, to talk to our audience, reflect back who they are. I use this example often. the technology of radio has changed, but in the beginning, we were the storytellers. We were telling the stories around a campfire at the end of the day. We would tell what's happened with the different people within our village of whatever, 40 or 50 people. If the men had gone out, I mean, we're talking a long time ago, right? 200,000 years ago. The men had gone out and they had successfully killed a mammoth. They would talk about that. How did that happen? So that everybody could learn how that was done. And that storyteller standing there around the campfire would help us to understand who we are as people, who we are as this village.
Yeah.
Now, flash forward 200,000 years, and we have that same responsibility. We are the storytellers. The technology doesn't matter, really. We are still broadcasting, using antennas. I don't know how long that's going to go. I think most radio stations that I work with are streaming their feed, right? And now, like we're doing right now, we're doing a podcast that people can listen to on demand. Radio itself has changed since I got in it in the 80s. The way that we present, the way that we do music here in North America. In the 80s, there was real competition between radio stations. It was real. But then when corporations began buying up multiple radio stations in the same market, depending on which market you're in the U.S., Canada isn't as bad. But in the U.S., one company could own 10 stations.
Yeah.
And they will stop competing with each other. They'll share advertisers. They'll share resources. A program director, for example, might not be just the program director for one station, but he may be programming 5 or 6 in that time. So radio has changed a lot, and radio is going to continue to evolve, but we still need to be the storytellers.
Yeah. One change I noticed was that when I started back in 2006, I think it was, there could be an event on that is sold out, and you'd ring up and say, "Hi, Garry Kelly here from XFM. Any chance for a pair of tickets?" "Yeah, Garry, your name will be on the door." Now, You ring up, they'd laugh at you.
Who are you? Yeah. Do you have a podcast? Oh, okay. We'll put you on the list.
Yeah. Wink, wink, yeah. Looking forward to that moment ever working. So we were talking about communication. Really, one of the skills in communication is the listening and be non-judgmental. But what are the skills in being a good storyteller?
Skills in being a good storyteller. Wow. I should probably do a whole course on that. The key to being a good storyteller is having a good story. Let me tell you a story.
Okay.
Can I tell you a story? I was this was a few years ago. I was at a small gathering for some friends of ours who were celebrating. I think it was their 20th anniversary, and the father of the bride looked at me and said, "Hey, David, you're the guy that talks all the time, right? Please say something. Give us a speech." And I was just, you want me to tell a speech? I wasn't even invited to the wedding. So I'll admit, Garry, that I kind of stumbled through a little minute or a 2-minute speech. And it wasn't really much of a speech, but it was just to say, hey, congratulations on your 20th wedding anniversary. But after that, I started to think, well, how could I do that better? How could I be in that situation better? And like Garry, the more prepared you are before you go on the radio, the more prepared you are, the better your show is going to be.
Yeah.
Right. So here's what I did, and I'm going to suggest it as something to you and to your audience as well. I started doing this soon after that incident. On your iPhone, if you have an iPhone or device, yeah. I have a notepad. There's a notepad in there. And I created a new note, and I called it story work. Right? At the end of the day, just about every day, I try to do it. But at the end of the day, I reflect back on my day and look for some kind of interesting thing that happened, a story that happened, something that happened, and there was a moral. There was a point to that story. I learned something, right?
Yes.
And as briefly as possible, on the note, I'll write in 2 sentences what happened, and next to it, I'll write what the moral was. The happy thing or something like that. So now I've got this huge database of stories of things that actually happened to me, right? And when somebody asks me, I'm going to a wedding this weekend, by the way, and actually another wedding next weekend, and I'm assuming that I'm going to be asked to say something, right? Close friends of mine. And so I'm looking through my list to see, okay, where is something that maybe I can use that story? I think it's a good technique.
Yeah.
And when you arrive in a place and say, "Hey, David, hey, Garry, could you say something?" You could stand up confidently and have a story to tell. So I think the best clue, the best tip I could give for storytelling is have a story to tell.
Yeah. And I just love that idea as well, of just documenting your day, because we go through it, our days, nearly like, a gerbil on a wheel or something like that. And we're not really taking in those moments that are well worth reflecting on.
Right. And sometimes it happens, but you completely forget about it.
Yeah.
If you can take a moment and just write 2 sentences and that's it, and fall asleep, at any time you could be, if you're sitting on the bus, if you're waiting, whatever, you could go through it, flip through it and go, "Oh yeah, I remember that," and develop that story for another time. This is one of the things. I'm
writing this down now because I'm going to do that on my iPhone afterwards. I am.
This is one of the things that helps you to become a master communicator. All of the courses that I'm preparing and am giving and have given are to help people to become a master communicator. It's impossible to be a master communicator. We're not born great communicators, but we can try every day to be just a little bit better, 1% better every day. Like I tell my kids, my 20-something-year-old kids, 1% better every day. You're going to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, and again, to be 1% better every day by documenting what you're doing,
right?
You will see where those improvements are being made.
Right.
You in your podcast, and the work you're doing, it's to help business leaders become better communicators.
Master communicators, yes.
Master communicators. So obviously that is to get what is in their head, down the line or across the line, whatever way you want to set up your organizational chart.
Right.
It's clear for the greater benefit of the business leader that his needs or wants are communicated effectively to people so that they're carried out. But is there a more organic necessity and goodness coming from that as well, rather than just the benefit of the person delivering the message?
Well, are you familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs? The hierarchy of needs. We need food, we need heat, we need shelter, etc. On Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right in the middle of the hierarchy of needs, things that we need to survive as human beings, is a sense of connection. It's right in the middle, a sense of connection. One of the things that I learned really early working in radio is we don't communicate just to communicate. If you're just communicating to communicate, you're not doing communication justice. The point of communicating, no matter if you're speaking one-on-one or 1 to 1 million, the point of communicating is to create connection. Connection is the most important thing, and it's one of those needs that we all have. Right now, what I see is, yes, there are some very good communicators out there, but we're not firing on all cylinders, if you get that analogy. Let me explain something. I was actually giving a course 2 weeks ago, and I had to, for time, I had to cut off one of the elements, and it's a very simple philosophy, where I say communication is like fire. Communication is like fire. Fire needs 3 things: Heat, fuel, and oxygen. To create fire, you need heat, fuel, and oxygen. To create connection, to communicate, to create connection, you need an audience, a message, and a messenger. Without one of those three things, connection can't happen. Without understanding your audience, if you don't know who they are, if you're talking to them like children, but they're PhDs in science and stuff, you're not going to be able to create that connection. You need to understand the audience, you need to understand your message, and you need to understand yourself, the messenger, because we have our own biases when it comes down to that. So communication is like fire. You need to understand your audience, your message, and the messenger, and yourself. These are the important things. And I think that the more we work on it, the more that we try to become better communicators, really, it may sound frou-frou a little bit, but I really think that we could create a better world.
It's interesting talking about communication and connection as well, because as you were saying it, I realized the one thing that I love about podcasting is actually connecting with both the guests who come on, but also the listeners who I'd be chatting with on Instagram mostly, or through the likes of TikTok or LinkedIn. But that's the thing I love. It's the feedback with them, the things that stuck with them, the conversations that they loved, the things that they would have, that they went on to do, having picked up a nugget of wisdom from a podcast, like open up the note on your iPhone app and start, or open up the note.
Make a collection of stories.
Collect stories. Yeah. Document your day when you're in bed at night, especially if you're one of those naughty people like me, where you're doing a final scroll on the phone before you put it on airplane mode at the locker side of the bed or whatever. But yeah, it makes sense to me why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it all comes down to connecting with different people, hearing their stories.
One of the things that's difficult, and you probably had the same difficulty as being a radio presenter, is you don't really have that immediate feedback from your listener unless they call you or text you, I guess. You don't have that immediate feedback, right? So what I would do, and probably what you would do also, is you would kind of need to envision or empathize with your audience. Where is your audience right now? Like I was talking about, communications like fire. Understand your audience. Where are they? I knew that my radio listeners enjoyed music. The majority were women, between 25 and 49 years old. We know that from our research. But I also had an idea that they were professionals, so they were at work. And when I was on the air was when they were at work. And what were they thinking about? They were thinking about, in the morning they have a meeting or whatever. But towards the end of the day, I also knew or empathized that they were getting ready to go home, and perhaps they didn't have a husband who cooks, for example. So they were planning their day. So when I was, speaking between the songs or introducing a song, I would have those things in mind when I was speaking, and often my audience would come up to me at public events and things and say, "I don't know what it is, David, about you, but I really feel connected to you." And that's when I started to, realize and come up with this philosophy. It is about connection. Communication isn't just about, broadcasting, right? It is about connection. And we were talking earlier about how radio has changed. Yeah. In the United States, more than here in Canada, a lot of stations are completely automated, and the presenters aren't even living in the city. And it's for the most part, it's pre-recorded, so there's no interaction at all with the audience. Yeah. And in my humble opinion, that's going to be the death of radio, or at least that kind of radio, because we need connection. It's like I said, it's
social media. It's connection. It's two-way conversation. That's why it's growing and growing and growing. It's. Yeah. And even when I think back during times of COVID, when teachers were working from home, teaching their classroom virtually, and a lot of students were knocking off the cameras as they were lying in bed or whatever.
My favorite one was the kid who wrote his name, loading ...
Brilliant. Didn't see that one. But what was driving them cracked was they obviously weren't able to make that connection. Like I've done teaching myself, and teaching in person is so much easier than teaching online because you can read the room, the energy, the vibe, you know, when to slow down what you're saying, when to move on to something else, when you need to explain deeper into something. Online, much harder. And again, cameras off, no connection.
Yeah, and it's that the feedback from your audience. I often coach one-on-one business leaders to prepare speeches. My youngest son, who's 23, turns 24 this year. He just graduated from university, Concordia University, and his first year in university. Here we do 3 years, by the way, in Quebec, and his first year was in the middle of COVID. And he hated it, his first year of university, because it was all on camera. There was zero interaction.
Yeah.
And, and it's understandable too. You know, the professors were not trained how to stand in front of a camera. The way that you and I are speaking, I don't know if we're going to be using the video for this, but the way that you and I are in front of a camera, we have a sense of what it takes to, you know, look all right, you know, create a nice background, have good lighting, have good sound. But teachers weren't trained to do that. And and he got through. He got his degree,
Brilliant.
bachelor in commerce. So
brilliant. So talk to me about tips that you would give leaders in business in terms of becoming good, not even good communicators, masters of communication.
Mm-hmm. There's a course that I give, and it's 9 things that you can do to become a master communicator. There's 9, but I'm not going to give you all 9.
You're only going to give us 8, huh?
I'll give you. I mean, that's a whole hour and a half presentation that I do. I'll give you 2 or 3. But like we said off at the beginning of the show, the most important thing is listening, active listening, not just listening, but active listening. 50% of the conversation is listening, and listening without judgment. I know I've had many bosses in radio that were really good at that, where I would say, listen, we need to talk. So close the door, sit down, and clear off the desk and actively listen. I'm listening to you now, right? You need to pay full attention, holding eye contact, focus only on the speaker. And the hardest thing for people like me anyways, is to keep your mouth shut. Not say anything, just to sit and listen and to absorb. Let me give you a quick anecdote. Back in my music radio days, I interviewed a lot of artists. And in the first few interviews, what I would do is I would prepare 10 questions. Okay, I'm going to ask this, and this. And what I would do is they would finish answering the first question. I go to the next one, third question, and I would just go down the list. But when I would listen back to the interview, I would go, oh, I missed that follow-up question. He said something interesting, and I could have gone down that way. And what I learned to do at that point is, yes, I would still prepare and have my 10 questions. But if the conversation went a different way, I would just follow it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I mean by active listening. You're not assuming as a business leader where the person that you're talking to is going. Just actively sit and listen. The other thing that is extremely important is empathy. Like we talked about a minute ago, empathizing with your audience. Where are they? Where are they emotionally? What are they doing right now? But you need to empathize with them, but not to confuse empathy for sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Perspective taking. I see your point. You stay out of judgment. Again, there's that word judgment, and recognizing emotion in others. So empathy is actually feeling with people.
Yeah.
So active listening, non-judgmental, being empathetic, understanding who your audience is. Here's an example of empathy. When an employee comes to you and is feeling, stressed out with problems at home and work, you could say something like, that sounds incredibly challenging. How are you holding up? Is there anything that I could do to support you during this time. That's being empathetic. So empathy. So active listening, empathy, and I think we have time for a third one. But again, adapting to your audience. Your audience being your employees, it could be your suppliers, it could be your customers, whatever. But understanding their needs and interests, and adjusting your language and your tone. I mean, you're not gonna talk to a child as if they are a grown adult, and vice versa. You're not going to talk to an adult as a child, because the way that you talk to a child is very different, and it also depends on what that child's been doing, what that child has been up to, So that's kind of an overview of some things. But I want to give you something else. A few years ago, when I was just starting the down this road of helping people become better communicators, I came up with an acronym. I think all speakers have to have some kind of an acronym. So, and as you know, Garry, Canadians are known for being nice.
True.
It's not always true, but we're known as being nice. So I call this the nice principle. Doesn't matter if you're speaking to 1 or 1 million people. The nice principle stands for be natural in the way that you speak. You don't have to be Mr. Spock, but be natural and relaxed and joyful. However, whatever your personality is, but be yourself. Be natural, and be intimate. Don't be afraid to share your feelings or something that that happened to you. Even better if you can be self-deprecating and find something funny about yourself to share with others. Yeah. The C is find commonality. Yeah. Garry, you and I, we both worked in radio, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great commonality to start a conversation
and creates connection as well.
Exactly. It creates connection. And then, as I mentioned before, the E is empathy. I think empathy is a really, really big part of creating connection. So that's the nice principle in a nutshell. Be natural, be intimate, find commonality, and have empathy. The nice principle is going to help you have meaningful, heart-centered communication to create that kind of connection. And it's a great principle because it works, between you and I, just having a conversation, or it works between a boss talking to an employee or talking to a room full of employees. So, Garry, be nice.
Yeah. Thank you. Just before we wrap up, any interesting guests that you interviewed over the years working in radio?
Just the other day, actually no, it was yesterday. I was going to the grocery store, and some car, Mercedes Benz or something, or whatever, big luxury SUV pulled in, and they were blasting this song, and I turned around and I went, "Oh my God, I haven't heard that song in such a long time." And then it made me remember the story. Aqua, the group Aqua, Barbie Girl,
yes,
came out. Mid 90s, late 90s, somewhere there. If you're not familiar, but you could probably search for that song, Aqua, Barbie Girl. So the record company brought the
I
band
can't remember how it goes, David. Can you just sing as if
No, I can't. I'm not falling for that, Garry. I'm falling for it. So the record company brings in the band, and we sit down, we get set up, and we start the thing. And after a while, I realized that my questions were kind of, I was getting like really short replies and responses, and they were all kind of sitting there like this, body language with their arms crossed and not really looking at each other, not really looking at me either, but not looking at each other. And I was like, oh man, something's going on here.
Yeah.
And anyway, so we wrapped up the interview, and I said, thank you very much. It was nice to meet you, blah, blah, blah. Take some pictures, yada, yada. Next day, Aqua broke up. Wow. And I went, oh, I hope it wasn't my interview.
That is mad.
That's how it is.
But I think they got back together again now since, didn't they? Probably because of the Barbie movie. Just
I don't know.
Gave them extra life again or something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they showed up to get their 20%, 25%.
Or kind of they realized that they ran out of money for the pension, so they had to get back on the road again.
Exactly.
Well, that is mad. I remember before interviewing a band from the UK, and they were very popular and they're on the radio and so on. And I didn't know that I was to interview them. I'll say who it was. So it was Mumford and Sons.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I didn't know when I got up that morning that I was going to be doing an interview with them, but it was planned last minute. So I got about an hour's notice to say, Mumford and Sons are in Galway and they're going to be coming in for you to do an interview. I was like, okay, because I was in the middle of doing a live show at this stage. So I was like, where do I get space in my head to prepare an interview? And as you said, the more prepared you are in advance, the better a show it'll be.
Exactly.
But one of the connections I made was the lead singer, I think it was, is married to Carey Mulligan, the actress. And right. I would be a big movie buff. So I was so excited. And she had just recently worked with Michael Fassbender, an Irish actor who I had interviewed recently. And I thought, I can make the connection there. And I was all excited. And when they came in, I said, oh, you're married to Carey Mulligan. And he said, yes, but we won't be talking about my marriage at all. We're only talking about music. And straight away, I was like, I have no questions now. But it ended up being a really good interview. And they said to me afterwards, and I don't know how truthful they were, but they said that's one of the best interviews they ever did.
Well, and why do you think that was? Why do you think that was?
Because
going back to what we were talking about.
I just had to listen,
That's it.
Yeah.
You had to sit and listen and react to what they were saying. But that's it. Yeah. Exactly. I think that those are the best interviews, when you just stop and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to you today, David. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I could listen to you all the time. I'm continuing and will continue to listen to your podcast, The Master Communicator. Yes, I just love the sound of your voice. And I'm sure loads of people say that to you from working radio for years. People say it to me, but I don't particularly love my voice. But you have the voice I would love to have.
Oh,
even the just sounds amazing. If people want to get more information about David as well, head over to his website, davidtylerspeaks.com. Continued success, David. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Garry. Thanks for having me.